I'm not telling you this so you'll feel sorry for me. I'm telling you because it's the part of me Patricia found first and never stopped using. David brought me to Willowbrook Court for the fourth date, an ambush of a Sunday dinner. I watched his mother do the math on me in real time. My shoes, my coat, the way I still said ma'am without thinking. She was gracious the entire evening, which is worse than rude, because you can't object to grace. On the porch, she took both my hands and said, warmly, in front of everyone, "What an inspiring story you are, Elena." A story, not a person. An inspiring story, the kind people tell to prove the system works. 11 years later, she had never once introduced me to anyone without working in where I came from. Sometimes it was dressed up as a compliment. It was never a compliment. It was a price tag she kept taped to my sleeve so nobody would mistake me for full retail. The strange thing is, I accepted it. Where I grew up, you learn early that belonging costs money. I had been raised by a woman who paid that bill her whole life. I just didn't know yet how literal the bill was going to get. Christmas at Patricia's was never a holiday. It was a production staged every year with a cast of 19 and a director who never once appeared to be directing. The china came down from the cabinet, service for 24, hand-washed only, older than the marriage that bought it. The menu was approved in November. The seating chart was never written down and never violated. Patricia at the head, Jenna at her right hand, David at her left, and me, 11 years running, at the far end between whichever cousins had children young enough to spill things. My daughter Mia, 6 that year, received a lecture the moment we walked in. "Sit up straight, sweetheart. In this family, we don't put elbows on the table." We stayed overnight every year because Patricia liked the photograph of grandchildren on the staircase in matching pajamas. Liked the photograph, mind you, the way a set designer likes a prop. And every year I packed our 2 duffel bags, smiled, and told myself it was only one night, that traditions matter, that Mia should know her grandmother. That's the sentence I want you to hold on to. Keeping the peace sounds like love when you say it fast enough. That year, the production had a surprise in the second act. Jenna arrived 40 minutes late, glowing like a woman with an announcement, hugging everyone a beat too long. "Big news," she kept saying, tapping her wine glass with one acrylic nail. "Wait for dinner." "In this family, we don't make scenes," Patricia had said that very afternoon to a 6-year-old over a dropped fork. By 8 o'clock that night, the only person in 19 years to make a genuine scene at that table would be Patricia herself. Before I tell you about dinner, you need 2 sentences from 2 different women because my whole life happened between them. The first was my mother's. I was 10, sitting at the card table, and I'd asked why she wore her good blouse to clean hotel rooms. She looked at me for a long moment and said, "We don't get a seat, Ellie. We rent one." Then she went to work. She rented her seat in every room she ever entered, with extra shifts, with perfect manners, with never once asking for anything. She died at 58, still current on the rent. I don't think a single one of those rooms noticed she was gone. The second sentence came from Patricia on my wedding day in the bridal room while she fixed a pin in my hair that did not need fixing. "None of this Mrs. Vargas business," she said, meeting my eyes in the mirror. "You'll call me Mom. In this family, we don't do formalities." And I did. 11 years I called that woman Mom. I brought her soup when she had her hips done. I called her on Sunday evenings when David forgot. Some part of me, the 10-year-old at the card table, believed that if I was useful enough, warm enough, cheap enough to keep, and expensive enough to lose, the title would eventually become real, the way a rental sometimes turns into a home. I want to be honest with you because this story doesn't work if I'm not. Nobody forced me into that arrangement. I volunteered. Over-functioning was the only language of love I'd ever been taught, and I was fluent. It took a slap across the face in front of my daughter to teach me the difference between being wanted at a table and being load-bearing. Dinner started at 6. The big news landed with the roast. Jenna stood, glass raised, and announced she was opening her 3rd boutique. Third, because the first two had each lasted about as long as a gym membership. This time in the good part of downtown. This time for real. Then she turned to the head of the table and said the sentence that started everything. And it's all thanks to Mom, who believed in me to the tune of $20,000. Applause. Actual applause from the cousins. And I sat at the far end of that table and did what 13 years in the emergency room have trained me to do: math under pressure. 20,000 from a 64-year-old widow on a pension who, as far as the family knew, was comfortably set, but whose actual monthly mortgage on the Colonial on Willowbrook Court had been quietly coming out of my checking account for 5 years. $1,100 a month, every single month since the winter my father-in-law died. Plus $300 a month for Jenna's car insurance and storage unit because there had been a crisis once, the way Jenna's life was a subscription service of crises, and temporary had turned into 60 months. I hadn't told the cousins. I hadn't told anyone. That was the deal I'd made with my own pride. You don't get to resent what you volunteer for. So I sat there while the family toasted Patricia's generosity, funded at $1,400 a month by the barrio trash at the end of the table, and I might have swallowed it. I had 11 years of practice swallowing. Except that Jenna, flushed with wine and victory, looked down the table at me and smiled and said, "Some people just talk about supporting family. Some of us are grateful enough to actually show up." She knew. That was the thing. She knew exactly whose money it was. I didn't yell. I want the record straight on that, because 19 people rewrote this scene within a week. I set down my fork, and into the after-toast quiet, I said calmly one true sentence. "Jenna, before we toast Mom's generosity, you should probably know the boutique money and your car insurance come from the same account my mortgage help comes from, mine and David's. It's been our money for 5 years. I've never minded, but if we're doing gratitude tonight, let's at least address the envelope correctly." Silence has a temperature. That one dropped below freezing. Jenna's glass stopped halfway down. David, beside his mother, went very still and looked at his plate. I watched him choose the plate. That is the sentence I would repeat in counseling months later. He chose the plate. And Patricia rose from the head of the table with the unhurried certainty of a woman who has never been contradicted in her own dining room. She walked the length of that table, past the china, past her grandchildren, and she slapped me across the face hard enough to turn my head in front of my daughter. "You'll always be barrio trash," she said, each word pressed flat and even, like a woman ironing. "Take your daughter and get out of my house." 19 people, and the only sound was the furnace. Mia's fork was still in her hand. I looked at my husband for one last full second, an offer, and he looked at his plate. So I stood up. I thanked no one. I took my daughter's hand, buttoned her coat in the hallway under the staircase photographs of matching pajamas, brought down our 2 duffel bags, and walked out the front door of the house I had been paying for without one word of argument. I didn't argue. I packed our bags. The drive home to Maple Ridge was 25 minutes. Mia fell asleep before the second stoplight. My hand stayed steady on the wheel because I was already doing the math again. My phone rang at 8:47 the next morning. The title of this story says Mom called me crying, and I need you to understand who that is. Not my mother. My mother has been gone 7 years. Mom is what I called Patricia at her own instruction for 11 years. The woman who told me we don't do formalities in this family was calling me at 8:47 the morning after she slapped me and put me out of her house like a stray. And she was crying. Real tears. I know the sound of real tears. I hear them for a living.
For about 4 seconds, standing at my kitchen counter with my coffee going cold, my stupid, loyal heart leapt at that sound. She's calling to apologize. 11 years of rent, and I still believed the lease might convert. Then she spoke. Elena, what you did last night, you've torn this family apart at Christmas. Do you understand that? Christmas. Jenna cried all night. The cousins keep calling me. My Christmas is in ruins. I said nothing. The crying gathered itself, and then, wet and casual, like a hand slipping into a pocket, came the actual reason for the call. And listen, the mortgage draft comes out on the 5th. With all this upset, I need to know that's not going to be affected. Tell me you're not going to be childish about the house. There it was. Not I'm sorry, not are you all right, not is Mia all right, the 6-year-old who watched her grandmother strike her mother. The draft comes out on the 5th. I stood in my kitchen and felt something in my chest go perfectly, surgically quiet. The same quiet I get when a monitor alarms and the room starts to panic and my hands already know the protocol. I'll text you, I said. Then I hung up and looked at my coffee. It was still warm. That's how fast a heart can finish changing. 11 years and 1 phone call, and the coffee was still warm. Let me give you the anatomy of the number, because every family has one, and nobody says it out loud. When my father-in-law died 5 years ago, it came out quietly in a lawyer's office that the Colonial on Willowbrook Court still carried a mortgage and that his pension had mostly died with him. Patricia had a widow's benefit and her pride. David sat at our kitchen island doing sums with a pencil, gray in the face, and I watched my husband drowning and did what I do. I said, we can cover the house note for a few months until she gets sorted. $1,100 a month, temporary. Then Jenna had her crisis of the season, a totaled lease and a storage unit full of inventory that never sold, and $300 a month joined the ticket, also temporary. Nobody ever decided it would become permanent. That's how these things work. Gratitude has a short memory. Invoices do not. Autopay is a miracle of mercy for everyone except the person funding it. The 5th of the month came. The money left. No one had to feel anything. 5 years, $1,400 a month, $84,000, while I patched my scrubs and Patricia bought new service pieces for the china cabinet. I tried to renegotiate 3 separate times. I never got past the opening sentence. The first time, Patricia developed a migraine that required the room. The second time, it was 3 weeks to Christmas, and in this family, we don't discuss money at the holidays. The third time, Jenna called mid-conversation with a crisis, and the meeting simply never reformed. You cannot schedule a conversation with people whose way of life depends on the conversation never happening. I understand that now. Back then, I just kept paying rent on a seat at a table where the landlady was already planning my eviction for free. Here is everything I did the morning after Christmas, in full, because the family version of this story has me scheming like a soap opera villain. I finished my coffee, I opened my banking app at the kitchen island while Mia watched cartoons in her pajamas. I went to scheduled payments and canceled 2 of them, the $1,100 and the $300. 4 taps, about 90 seconds, less time than Patricia had spent walking the length of her table to slap me. Then I wrote 1 text message, revised it twice, not to sharpen it but to file the edges off, and sent it to Patricia, copying Jenna, because I don't do things behind backs. After last night, the financial support ends. The December payments were the last ones. It isn't punishment and it isn't a negotiation. It's just over. I wish you both well. Please don't call about this. I did not post anything. I did not text a single cousin. I did not tell my side to one human being except my husband. When he came downstairs 10 minutes later, hair flattened, holding his phone like it was ticking, it was because his mother had already called him before 9 a.m. to report what I'd done. Notice the order of operations. It matters. The first reply I received wasn't from Patricia. It was 3 question marks, then a paragraph. I'll spare you most of it, but the closing line I remember word for word because people always tell you exactly what they're most afraid of, dressed up as a prophecy about you. You just made the biggest mistake of your marriage. Not of my life, of my marriage. Even in a panic about her car insurance, Jenna knew precisely where the pressure point was and precisely who could be counted on to stand on it. She was aiming at David before I'd rinsed my coffee cup. David and I had it out that night after Mia was asleep, in the kitchen, in the fierce whispers of parents who have never learned to fight at normal volume. I'll give him this much. He never once defended the slap. He had texted his mother that morning that what she did was unforgivable, and I believe he meant the word as much as a man can mean a word he has never once acted on. But about the money, he stood in front of the refrigerator and said, "I just don't think we should weaponize it. That's her house, Ellie. She's 64." And I heard myself answer in a voice I didn't recognize, low and level, the voice underneath 11 years of pleasant. "I'm not weaponizing anything. A weapon is something you swing at someone. I'm just putting down something I was never supposed to carry alone. There's a difference between attacking a person and no longer subsidizing her." He said she would lose the house. I said that was possible, and that it would not be my doing. The house had been losing itself for 5 years, and I had been the sandbag. You cannot call it a flood the moment the sandbag stands up and walks away. He said, "She's my mother." And I said the thing I had been circling for 11 years and never once landed on. "I know, and I've been her second income and her favorite insult at the same time since Mia was 1 year old. You watched it happen at that table your whole life, and last night you looked at your plate." He flinched like I'd raised a hand to him. He slept in the den. I lay awake in our bed doing what I do at 3 a.m. in the ER, watching the numbers and refusing to panic. Somewhere before dawn, I understood that the slap had only ended my arrangement with Patricia, my arrangement with David, the one where I carried things so he would never have to choose. That one was just now coming up for review. In January, a strange little door opened. David had brought home boxes from Willowbrook Court months earlier, his father's things, the estate stuff nobody fights over, fishing licenses, cufflinks, a shoebox of photographs. It fell to me to sort them. Useful is useful, even in exile. And in the shoebox between a fishing trip and a christening, I found a black and white photograph of a laundromat. "Suds and Spin," the sign said, hand-painted. Out front, a teenage girl in an apron, arms crossed, chin up, looking at the camera the way you look at something you've decided to survive. It took me a full 10 seconds, and then it took my breath. The jawline, the eyes. Patricia. I turned it over. Nothing but a year, 4 decades and change ago, written in pencil. When I showed David, he did something I'd never seen in 11 years of marriage. He glanced at the kitchen doorway first, in his own house, before he answered, as if her hearing still reached across town. "Grandma and Grandpa ran that place," he said quietly. "Mom worked there through high school. She doesn't talk about it. Dad kept that picture. She hated that he kept it." I stood at my kitchen island holding the photograph of a girl in an apron with my mother-in-law's face, a girl who once folded strangers' sheets after school, and I felt the floor of 11 years tilt a few degrees. "You'll always be barrio trash," she had said, the same woman who had once been the girl in the apron, the same woman who spent 5 years collecting rent from the girl who grew up above a different laundromat and then slapped that girl for telling the truth about the rent. I never confronted her with the photograph. I didn't need to. The war I was fighting was never about proving she was a hypocrite. It was about refusing to keep paying the privilege of being called one.
February arrived with a certified letter from the bank. Patricia's mortgage was 90 days past due. The letter was polite the way banks are when they are about to take a house. David brought it home and laid it on the island without speaking. I read it once, folded it, and put it back in the envelope. "You're not going to ask me to restart the payments," he said. "Good," I answered, because I wouldn't. He nodded. It was the smallest possible nod, but it was the first time in 11 years he had chosen anything other than the plate. By March, the cousins had stopped calling. Jenna's third boutique closed before it properly opened. The storage unit went to auction. Patricia moved into a one-bedroom apartment near the senior center. She still called David every Sunday. She never called me again. The title Mom simply evaporated, the way a rental agreement ends when the last check stops clearing. Mia asked me once months later why Grandma didn't invite us for Christmas anymore. I told her the only version a 6-year-old needs. Because Grandma decided she didn't want us at her table, and we decided we didn't need to keep paying for a seat we weren't allowed to sit in. David and I are still married. We go to counseling every other Thursday. Some weeks we make progress. Some weeks we sit in silence and listen to the clock. He is learning slowly that looking at the plate is also a choice. I am learning that carrying everything so no one else has to is not love. It is a quiet kind of disappearing. I still work nights in the ER. I still hold strangers' hands at 2 in the morning. But when I come home now, the porch light is on, the door doesn't stick quite as badly, and the seat at my own kitchen island is mine, fully. No rent due, no price tag taped to my sleeve. The slap happened on Christmas night. The war ended the next morning with 4 taps on a banking app and 1 carefully worded text. Everything after that was just the sound of a family learning what it actually costs to keep a quiet woman useful. If you've ever paid rent on a seat that was never yours, if you've ever been called inspiring while being treated as disposable, if you've ever watched the people you carried look at their plates when it was time to stand up, this story is for you. Drop a comment, tell me the sentence you finally said out loud, and subscribe. The quiet ones are done whispering.
My name is Elena Vargas. I'm 35, and last Christmas, my mother-in-law slapped me across the face in front of 19 relatives. It wasn't because of the argument with my sister-in-law. It was because of the one true sentence I said during it. She called me barrio trash. She told me to take my daughter and get out. So I did. No scene, no shouting, just a 6-year-old's coat buttoned carefully in the hallway and 2 bags already waiting in the trunk. And what I did the next morning, quietly from my phone before my coffee even cooled, is the reason she was the one crying by 9:15 a.m. But here's what none of them knew yet. I had been carrying that entire family for 5 years, and I was about to set them down. Welcome back to Calm Drama Stories. This is the place where quiet women finally get loud. Stories about family, betrayal, and the exact moment somebody decides that enough is enough. If you have ever kept the peace at your own expense, this one will feel familiar. Drop a comment and subscribe because the ending is worth staying for. The story of that slap begins with 2 houses. The first is mine, a 4-bedroom split level on Maple Ridge that my husband David and I bought 11 years ago. The front door sticks every summer. The kitchen island is the one we refinished ourselves on a long weekend when we still believed we were building something permanent. I'm an emergency room nurse, 13 years of 12-hour shifts, 13 years of telling strangers that their person is gone and then driving home to fold laundry like the world is still ordinary. David is a project manager at a mid-sized construction firm, steady, soft-spoken, allergic to conflict in a way I didn't fully understand until it cost me everything I thought I was protecting. The second house is his mother's, a brick colonial on Willowbrook Court, 25 minutes away. The hedges are trimmed so sharply they look punished. The dining room seats 24 when the leaf is in.
Patricia Vargas has a phrase she deploys the way other people use punctuation, in this family, in thank you notes. In this family, I learned over 11 years of marriage, there was a place for me at the cable, but it was never quite mine. I was useful, and useful is different from belonging. I worked every holiday nobody else wanted so I could afford to be generous. I remembered every birthday. When my father-in-law died 5 years ago, I was the one who sat with Patricia through the funeral home appointments while her own daughter was too devastated to choose flowers, but not too devastated to post a long tribute online. None of that ever moved my chair 1 inch closer to the center of the table. There was a number attached to my seat, an exact number with a $sign, and I'll get to it because that number is the reason this story ends the way it does. But first, you need to know where I come from because Patricia never let anyone forget it. I grew up in a 2-bedroom apartment above a laundromat on the south side of the city. My mother worked the night shift folding sheets that belonged to people who never knew her name. She raised me alone on strong coffee and the kind of stubbornness that doesn't ask for applause. I did homework at a card table that folded against the wall. I learned to stretch a package of chicken thighs across 4 dinners. At 18, I started as a tech in the county ER and paid my way through nursing school with night shifts and scholarships. The day I pinned on my RN badge, my mother cried into a dish towel because we didn't own handkerchiefs.